We're about to be joined by Casey Bloys, a Chief Product Officer of HBO and HBO Max. But first, let's get a reminder of the powerhouse properties that he's in charge of. Hey, Casey.
Hi there, how are you?
I'm very well. You know, for a veteran of HBO, you're looking remarkably fresh-faced. It clearly doesn't, it doesn't worry you, clearly.
No, it's a good and fun job to have.
Okay, so I think everyone here is pretty familiar with HBO and what it means and the incredible shows that it's produced over the years. We're less familiar with HBO Max, so just explain that to us. What's the deal? Is it like Pepsi and Pepsi Max, or what's going on?
So the idea with HBO Max, first of all, the idea for HBO Max, the platform, is obviously, I'm sure you are all aware of what's happening with our cable bundle and linear distribution in the US. It is not dead by any means. It is still a viable business, but it is on the decline. And so what we and everybody is trying to do is prepare for the future. And what HBO Max allows us to do is, the way I look at it is kind of controlling our own cable bundle, creating our own cable bundle. So it allows HBO to continue doing what it's doing. I continue to oversee HBO with the same team that we've had in place for years. We've all worked together I've been at HBO for 17 years, and my colleagues have been there just as long in the creative head departments. So we're still doing what we're doing at HBO. And for HBO Max, what we're trying to do is broaden out from HBO. And the way I look at that, it is a number of things. One, we've got a fantastic library of acquired content from Warner Brothers, things like Big Bang Theory and Friends, obviously. We got a great deal on South Park for HBO Max. We've got, in the originals, what we're trying to do is go places where HBO historically has not gone, and that includes things like young adults, like Gossip Girl, Sex Lives of College Girls, which you saw a little tease for there. We have our first kind of big DC show coming up in 22, Peacemaker, which is from James Gunn, which is a spinoff from his Suicide Squad movie. DC is not an area we had typically gone at HBO. It allows us to have a more sustained cadence of female programming. We've got a long history of shows that appeal to women on HBO, like Big Little Lies, The Undoing, Mayor of Easttown, but this allows us to do more. And with adult animation, allowing us to target young males. So the idea is that if you take HBO and then you take the programming from HBO Max that is broadened out, the acquired programming, and all of our movies, it's a really attractive offering for somebody who is choosing maybe to get their entertainment this way as opposed to through a cable bundle.
Okay, and when it started, when WarnerMedia came up with the idea, there were one or two people, including one or two now departed HBO executives, who thought that it was trashing a really distinctive brand. So just tell us how that's worked out.
Again, the way that I think about it is, HBO, if you look on HBO Max, HBO is, has its own area. And again, we're not changing the kinds of shows that we do at HBO or anything like that. Again, the way I think about it, if you think about HBO historically distributed through cable bundles, we were always kind of next to other channels that, weren't doing what we were doing, and that's okay. I think that people who enjoy watching HBO certainly enjoy watching other kinds of programming. So, but the biggest goal here is to preserve what we're able to do on HBO in a future where digital distribution is key.
Okay, and we're going to come to what you're doing in Europe in a minute, but just first, there's a big upheaval in Hollywood. And just this week, we've got Jim Giannopoulos leaving Paramount, and there's talk that, the Viacom CBS leadership wanted somebody who was keener on moving films quicker to streaming. Christopher Nolan, who I think described HBO Max as the worst streaming service at one point, but I guess that's a historical comment. But he was upset at a lot of Warner Brothers movies being pushed in the pandemic onto HBO Max. So just say what's happening with Hollywood, how's that relationship going to develop with the studios?
Well, in terms of features, Toby, Emmerich, and Ann really oversee the features, so I don't want to comment too much on their world, but I will say what's been reported on is obviously what you've got is a lot of factors coming together at once. You've got, as we're talking about digital distribution coming in, and you also had a pandemic. And I would say the pandemic is really what forced this. And you don't need me to go through the various reasons why choosing day and date for this year made sense. But I think that Toby and Ann have been pretty clear that going forward in 22, hopefully the pandemic is behind us and they can go back to a theatrical release model, which I know that they really value.
Okay. And so just outline for us now what your plans are for Europe, because so far HBO Max has been very much a US phenomenon, I think.
Right. So in June, we launched, just to give you a little context, in June, we launched in Latin America. We were in 39 countries. In October, we'll be in the Nordics and Spain. And then in first quarter 22, we're going to be in other European countries. Obviously, in the UK, we still have our very beneficial and happy relationship with Sky. I think that runs through 25, and we'll see what happens at that point. But it's been a great way for us to get HBO programming in the UK, and it's been a very happy collaboration.
And do you think how much is the service going to be different in Europe than what you see in the US? And how much are you going to try to develop local programming?
Well, if you think about what HBO has been doing in Europe, Anthony Roots has been leading the programming there for a number of years. And local programming, I think regardless of what country or territory you're in, local programming is key and is really important, and in many cases does better than the programming that we're providing from the US. So I don't think there's any territory where there's not going to be local programming. And I think the real key in having a more coordinated international approach is both the local programming, which is so important, but also if we can get European programming that works in the US, that's a real benefit to us. And I think that audiences, because of streaming, are a lot more open to foreign language shows than they were even 2 or 3 years ago. So it's a big that exchange of shows, the domestic US shows traveling to Europe and vice versa. It's a really if you can get one that hits, it's great. We had 30 Coins, which is a Spanish show, and Beartown, which was a Swedish show on HBO domestic. They both did really well. And that's great for us because it was produced for another territory. The fact that works in a US market is just, an added bonus.
And when those sorts of shows, are you mostly looking for something that's going to work in the local territories? Or are you thinking to yourself, really the ideal property is going to go across borders and it's going to have to be slightly different from what a local territory would be?
That is a balance that programmers in every territory, US included, have to think about. I think it's always a mix. Generally speaking, I think probably everybody in this room knows that dramas tend to travel, world building shows tend to travel. Comedies can be a little trickier because they're so based on cultural nuance. So we haven't had a whole lot of success in translating those. But it can't be, I don't think it can be the #1 driver. I think you can think about it, and I think it's fine to make sure it's one of the factors you think about in terms of international appeal, but I don't think that's a way to program successfully where you're thinking what show can appeal to the entire world all at once. I think you really do have to think about local programming, and there are certain shows, like I said, like dramas, that do lend themselves to that, but I don't think that can be the #1 criteria for deciding what you're going to program.
Okay, you mentioned the Sky relationship, and obviously your long-term ambition is going to direct to consumer in these various territories, and at the moment that's not possible in the Sky territories, even if you wanted to. When you look out into the future, do you think the ultimate ambition is to shed output deals and to go direct to consumer everywhere?
It will, honestly, I'm not dodging this. I will say, because I don't, obviously that is important to all companies, Sky included. So I think everybody's trying to figure out what makes sense globally and what makes sense market by market. So how's that for a non-answer?
Okay, I'm going to let you off the hook on that one, but I'm just going to ask actually related question, which is what's so good about direct consumer? What is it that in terms of the knowledge you pick up, the way that you can adjust programming on a streaming platform, what's so appealing about it?
Well, I would say that it's a really good question, and that data we're still, we've only been operating for a year plus so far, so we're still figuring out the best way to use the data. But I think anytime you've got a direct relationship with the consumer, they tell you what they like, what they don't like, what kinds of shows. I think the real benefit is seeing what other shows somebody likes. When somebody comes into a service, what's the first show that they look at? I think that's a really important and telling sign. And what types of shows bring people in, and then what keeps them. And I think we've always been a creative-driven company, not a data-driven company. I don't see that changing at all. However, I do think it will be helpful to get a better sense of how people are using your service, what kinds of shows they're watching and for how long, and what they respond to. Harder to do when it was a wholesale relationship.
And since we're in the UK, let's just talk a little bit about some of the UK productions or UK influence productions. You've had some very successful properties. You've obviously gained quite a bit already from the UK creative community, and I was interested in Succession. I know Succession is a drama that's going to interest quite a few people in this room, particularly people who used to work in News Corp. But one of the interesting things is the writer's room is in London, but it's a drama set in New York. So it's interesting, this idea, I think, that creative teams can go across borders. Do you see more of that?
It really depends. It's funny, before, I was thinking about this before this panel, and I would be hard-pressed to tell you a co-production that we didn't have a good experience with. And that's across the board. We've got shows like I May Destroy You, Starstruck, His Dark Materials, Gentleman Jack, Industry with BBC. We did Chernobyl. We're doing a new show called Landscapers and the Baby with Sky. We did It's a Sin with Channel 4. And when I think about over the years at HBO, I don't think I've had one bad experience developing with colleagues in the UK. And that's, as I said, that's across a number of kinds of shows and different networks. Succession was different, obviously, because we had a relationship with Jesse. So I do think it's I think writer's room, depending on what the showrunner wants to do, I don't think there's any reason why, if Jesse is the showrunner and he wants to do it in London, why the family is an international family. Clearly, they spend time in London and New York and LA. So the writers' room for us is usually up to the showrunner and what they want it to be and what where their lives are. So we try to accommodate that as best we can.
Okay, last question just about co-production, because we're talking about that. There's been some pretty fruitful relationships between the streaming platforms and broadcasters and production companies here. But Mark Thompson, the former head of the BBC, warned in a speech a couple of years ago. He said, don't think that the streaming platforms are going to want co-production forever. They're going to want all the rights. So don't kid yourselves. What would you say about that?
I think, to your question earlier about what it's going to look like for all streamers in the UK, what each outlet looks like, I think is an open question for sure. But the one thing I think I know for me personally, creatively, is I'm going to continue. You have an incredibly vibrant television community in the UK and have for decades. So I know I'm going to want to continue to work with producers and writers and directors from the UK. What that looks like on a platform basis, again, I think that's something that all companies are trying to figure out. But the one thing I do know is I can't see a scenario where we don't work with producers and talent from the UK.
Okay, Casey, this conversation could go on a long time, but we're not allowed. So thank you so much for joining us. And next time we hope to see you in person.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I would love to be in person.